Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the RDX Sports Podcast. I'm Simon Head, and it has been a busy time in the world of combat sports. We've had a busy weekend this past weekend, and we've got a huge one coming up this weekend. We have UFC 309 on Saturday night. John Jones taking on Stipe Miocic for that undisputed heavyweight title at Madison Square Garden. Michael Chandler rematching Charles Oliveira for a possible shot at Islam Makhachev and that lightweight belt. It's going to be a huge night at Madison Square Garden. And before that, in Dallas, Arlington, Texas, to be accurate, AT&T Stadium, home of the Dallas Cowboys, who aren't doing too well in the NFL right now, we have Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson in a ridiculous fight. And then in the co-main event, what could be one of the fights of the year, Katie Taylor rematching Amanda Serrano for the super lightweight undisputed crown. That should be a fantastic fight. But for this particular show, we're going to take a look back at what just happened this weekend on a busy night of combat sports. These are my Saturday night takeaways. Let's kick things off with the main event of UFC Vegas 100. Carlos Prates putting on a show. Huge performance to stop Neil Magny late in round one and really put the rest of the welterweight division on notice. It was a huge breakout performance from the man known as the Nightmare, and I think there's going to be one or two 170-pounders who will start to have some sleepless nights about potentially being matched up with this guy. He looks like a real problem at 170 pounds. Neil Magny, the term gatekeeper has always been a bit of a negative one in combat sports, but Magny's really embraced that sort of status and relishes the opportunity at really putting these up-and-comers through their paces and being that measuring stick. But against Carlos Prates, he was just completely outgunned. And Prates was able to deal with Magny's wrestling pretty well. Magny tried to take him down early. Prates reversed it, ended up on top. And then when the fight got back to the feet, it was one-way traffic. Carlos Prates, with his Muay Thai striking, just far, far too good for Neil Magny. Hurt him with a big shot and eventually finished him. The shot that actually put him out was a strange one. It kind of grazed the temple or grazed the top of his head. Didn't seem to connect completely flush, but you know, he'd already landed some big shots before then, and Carlos Prates getting the knockout victory and putting the rest of the division on notice. Huge performance for the Brazilian, and that Fighting Nerds gym out of Sao Paulo, Brazil, they are on an absolute tear. Bruna Brazil getting a big win in Manchester over Molly McCann. Caio Borralho is doing big things at middleweight. And you got this guy, Carlos Prates, who looks like a serious threat to the division's best at 170 pounds. Really looking forward to seeing how they match him. He suggested Jeff Neal. He called for a shot with Jack Della Maddalena. That'd be a huge leap up the rankings if they give Prates a shot against JDM next. But stylistically, that would be an outstanding matchup to make. So we'll see how they book it, because Carlos Prates, I think whoever they put him in there with at 170, it's going to be must-see TV. He's an entertaining fighter to watch. He's a dangerous man to face, and it's going to be very interesting to see who gets given a bout agreement with his name on it next time out. And in 2025, I would not be at all surprised if we see Carlos Prates right in there in that elite group of fighters at the very top of the UFC welterweight division. Another one of the night's big winners came in the co-main event of UFC Vegas 100. Reinier de Ridder, the former two-division one championship world champion, joining the UFC and getting his UFC career off to a winning start with a submission victory over Gerald Meerschaert. Now, Meerschaert might not be one of the very biggest names in the division, but this man is as skilled as they come on the ground. He's as seasoned as they come on the ground. I think he's got 29 career wins by submission. I think he's got the middleweight record for UFC finishes. He surpassed the great Anderson Silva last time out. But against Reinier de Ridder, he just had no answer. It looked as if he was going to lean on his striking early on in that fight and was doing reasonably well. And then de Ridder, who looked very sort of herky-jerky and awkward on the feet, suddenly found some power and connected with a huge shot that put Meerschaert on the seat of his pants and threatened to finish the fight in the closing moments of round one. But then in round two, we saw RDR turn to his grappling, and when he gets you to the mat, it's like quicksand. And he managed to lock up an arm triangle choke and finish, as I say, a seasoned submission operator like Gerald Meerschaert. That is super impressive. That wasn't just a run-of-the-mill UFC middleweight with sort of average level grappling. Meerschaert's one of the better grapplers in the UFC, certainly one of the better grapplers in the middleweight division. And RDR handled him with consummate ease, really. And the question now is just how high is the ceiling for Rainier de Ridder in the UFC middleweight division? Going back to his one championship career, he won the title in two weight classes. He won it at middleweight, which in one championship is 205. The weight classes are a bit different in one. And he also won the light heavyweight title in one, which is 225 pounds. So he's actually cutting a lot more weight now to fight in the UFC. You don't have the hydration clauses that you have fighting for one championship. So you are able to cut weight a little bit more in the UFC than perhaps you would be able to in one championship, certainly for a title fight. So 185 pounds, he's been to the PI, I think, and he's been checked out and been sort of advised that that is the optimum weight class for him. He's gone in there, he's beaten Gerald Meerschaert, and now he's looking for the big names in the division. The interesting thing about this one is he looks beatable, right? He's got this incredible ground game that if you get him, if you end up on the floor with him, you're in big trouble. But in the stand-up, I would imagine a large number of fighters fighting in that sort of upper echelon of the 185-pound division will think, fine, work on that takedown defense, keep the fight standing. I'll light this guy up on the feet, because De Ridder looked not too comfortable, to be honest, in the stand-up, even though he did rock Meerschaert later in the round. He looks like he can definitely be got at on the feet, but on the mat, it is a different proposition, and he's going to be a real problem in that 185-pound division. Looking forward to seeing how they book him next, who they match him with stylistically. There's a lot of options at 185 pounds, which could do with a new contender or two, just to sort of move up that division and provide some more competition to sort of join that upper group, which is currently headed, of course, by Dracus du Plessis. But interesting to see how things go for the Dutch knight Rainier de Ridder, who also had a few parting words for one championship, or he had some negative things to say about one championship, where he's advising fighters who were considering signing for the Singapore-based promotion to maybe not do that and go somewhere else. But RDR in the UFC, that's a good ad for the UFC middleweight division. I'm looking forward to seeing how things pan out for him in 2025. It was also a really big night for Gillian Robertson. Now, I'll preface this straight away by saying she was not happy with her performance at UFC Vegas 100. Go back and watch the interview that she did with Michael Bisping in the cage immediately after her victory over Luana Pinheiro. She wasn't happy. Why? She didn't get the finish. Gillian Robertson is the quintessential finisher of fights in the women's strawweight division and in the women's flyweight division, where she picks up an awful lot of her finishes earlier on in her career. She holds the UFC women's record for the most submission finishes of all time, and she's just continuing to stack up wins and stack up submission finishes. However, there was no submission finish for her on Saturday night against Luana Pinheiro, a judo black belt who was able to not keep the fight standing, but do enough to not be submitted in a fight that was pretty one-sided, I would say. Pinheiro fought really hard, was competitive on the feet for sure, but with the fight on the mat, it really was all Gillian Robertson. And try though she might, she wasn't able to get that submission finish. However, that was a victory over top 15 opposition. It was a victory over someone ranked one place above her. I think Gillian was ranked 14th heading into the weekend. Pinheiro was 13th. So you would imagine that when the rankings are refreshed at the start of this week, they may well swap positions in that 115-pound list. I'm not sure that Gillian will jump too many spaces further up than that, by virtue of the fact that it was just a decision win rather than an emphatic sort of submission finish or a knockout. So I would imagine it would be just a bump up of one place for Gillian Robertson. But what it does do, it shows that she's got a win over a higher ranked opponent. She will now, she would like to think, probably get a fight with someone in and around the number 10 mark in the division and look to break into that top 10. And she said in a post-fight interview, I think she wants to be challenging for the belt in the next year or so. So interesting to see. Again, it's always interesting to see how they match these fighters after they come off a win. But Gillian Robertson is one of these fighters who she's got a very specific set of skills, as someone once said, and she's very, very, very dangerous with the fight on the mat. She's got one of the most dominating top games you'll find anywhere in women's MMA, and she's moving on up in that 115-pound division. Having dropped down from flyweight, she's now owning things at 115. I don't think it'll be too long before they put her in there with one of the more well-known, long-standing contenders in that division. But big win for Gillian Robertson, even though she wasn't that excited about the victory herself. Obviously, on Saturday night, we had UFC Vegas 100, and we've just gone through the three big takeaways from that event. But that wasn't the only decent-sized event that was taking place in on Planet MMA this weekend. Bratislava, Slovakia played host to Oktagon 63, as the Tipos Arena in Bratislava played host to a pretty busy fight card and some great fights taking place over there. Oktagon MMA, I'm sure you would have by now seen and heard about that huge stadium show they did last time out, Oktagon 62 in Frankfurt, Germany. If you want to learn any more about it, check a previous episode of this very podcast. I was over there in Germany and we did a podcast sort of on the ground during fight night. Got some backstage stuff, spoke to some of the promotion officials, and got some really good stuff there on a night that was absolutely massive. 59,000 fans inside a soccer stadium, the home of Eintracht Frankfurt, there in Germany for a huge event. This was back to their regular sort of formula, arena shows, packed house as it always is, and a big night for one of the biggest stars in Slovakian mixed martial arts, Ivan Bukinger, former two-division champion in Oktagon, and a man who, for some people, is best known for being the guy that Conor McGregor knocked out in Cage Warriors to earn his shot in the UFC. But Bukinger is one of the best fighters to come out of that part of the world, and has been a consistent threat at 145 pounds and 155 pounds in Oktagon MMA. He main evented in his hometown against rising German prospect Hafeni Nafuka, who I think is only 21 years of age. This was the youngest main eventer in the promotion's history. Nafuka picked up a win last time out, actually, in Frankfurt, picked up a decision win. To be honest, wasn't that inspiring a performance. He kind of ground out a pretty boring performance, but he got the win, and that earned him a shot at Bukinger. And if he could get past him, then I think big things would have been coming up next for the fighter known as the Namibian Nightmare. And he started well. He started really well against Bukinger. Rocked him badly. Looked like he had him in big trouble. Wasn't able to get the finish in round one. And by the time he got to the end of round one, the gas tank was running dry. You know, the little needle was pointing to E at that point. He was done. And there was some potentially a little bit of shenanigans went on in the corner. Some clever corner work potentially. And it was called out pretty emphatically by Luke Barnett on commentary. I think it was Michael Diegashek, himself an Oktagon fighter, was in Nafuka's corner. And I think some water may have been accidentally spilled in the corner, which bought Nafuka probably another minute or so just to try and get a bit more oxygen into those lungs of his and sort of prep him for round two. But tactic did not work. He did not have enough gas in the tank. Bukinger took over in round two and eventually stopped him with strikes at he says, checking his notes, the 3:23 mark of round two. It showed you a couple of things. It showed you that Ivan Bukinger is as tough as old boots. And even though he was taking a bit of punishment in round one, was able to bounce back in round two and get the job done. It also showed us that Nafuka still has some way to go before he can be considered a legit contender in that Oktagon lightweight division. Needs to fix those gas tank issues. His wrestling is solid. He's clearly got some power in his hands. Gas tank let him down on Saturday night, and a little bit of time away building that cardio, maybe losing a little bit of muscle, building a little bit of cardio. He'll come again. I mean, he's still very, very young in the sport, and he's swimming in a pretty talent-stacked division. the Oktagon 155 division. So he'll come back for sure, but he needs a better gas tank in order to really make the most of his skills, I think, inside the Oktagon cage. But what it also does, it shows us that the two division champion is still very much a factor, and there are still big fights out there for Ivan Bookinger in Oktagon MMA. But it was a good main event, good performance, and as all main events should, it sent the crowd home happy. And my final takeaway from Saturday night was all about a fight that didn't actually take place on Saturday night. Instead, it was a fight that was confirmed on Saturday night. Carlos Vemela, the Oktagon light heavyweight champion, will be taking on Will Fleury, the Irish contender who has really forced his way into championship contention in the Oktagon 205-pound division. Made no secret of the fact that he wants Carlos Vemela, offered to fight him on that card on Saturday. Vemela was due to headline that event against Samuel Pirat Kristofic in a rematch. Kristofic picked up an injury, leaving Vemela without an opponent. Fleury went in and absolutely flatlined former interim champion Pavel Langer. Nearly said Pavel Neruda. Pavel Neruda is a co-founder of Oktagon. Pavel Langer, the former interim light heavyweight champion at Oktagon 62, and said, look, I haven't got a scratch on me. Let's turn this thing around. Let's do it quick. Let's do it in Bratislava at Oktagon 63. That did not happen, but both men were in attendance in Bratislava. They brought in Carlos Vemela. He did a bit of an interview in the cage, and then they brought in Will Fleury and announced that the fight between the pair is on. There's a little bit of history between the pair. Sounds like Vemela caused an injury to Will Fleury during a sparring session, and apparently wasn't all that bothered about it at the time. That rankles with Fleury still to this day. But also Fleury is just a man on a mission. You know, his issues when he was at the PFL are well discussed at this point. Failed drug tests for banned substances, was thrown out of the PFL $1 million tournament while he was doing very well in it. Lost his shot at potentially fighting for $1 million in the PFL light heavyweight belt. Regrouped, sorted out the things he needed to sort out, got back into competition again, and is now fighting for Oktagon. He picked up a big win over Daniel Skvor at Oktagon 56 in Birmingham. I was there for that. It was a great performance to get that win by submission against a dangerous kickboxer. He then took on Pavel Langer, former interim light heavyweight champion, and a man who is notoriously difficult to finish. He goes in and knocks him out in the first round to earn the shot at Carlos Vemela, who is an absolute legend of Oktagon MMA. He has fought a who's who, not just in Europe, but he's also a former UFC fighter. He's been in the cage at the highest level, trains at a London Shoot Fighters here in the UK, and he's a remarkable character. He's got like some sort of menagerie of animals at his house, like lions and tigers and God knows what else, exotic birds and all this sort of stuff. He's a real character, but he's also a hard-nosed, in-your-face fighter. And the man that they call the Terminator is looking to bring the curtain down on his career in the not too distant future. And among that final chapter of his career will be a light heavyweight title defense on December the 29th at Oktagon's final show of the year, Oktagon 65, which will take place at the 20,000 seat O2 Arena in Prague, Czech Republic, which is as close to a home game as Carlos Vemela could possibly wish for. He'll defend that belt against Will Fleury, who, as I say, a man on a mission, determined to build a legacy for himself and to topple the champ and capture that 205-pound title. That's going to be a huge fight on a huge fight card. That card, by the way, will be headlined by the Tip Sport Game Changer finale, which will also double up as their lightweight title fight, as the lightweight champion Ronald Paradisa and former lightweight champion and current featherweight champion Losine Keita will rematch for the tournament title, the 300,000 euros, and the lightweight belt, after Paradisa said that he would put that belt on the line as well. That's going to be absolutely huge. There's also a women's bantamweight title fight on that card as well. It's going to be a huge night in Prague on December 29th. But the addition of Vemela versus Fleury just adds another dimension to what should be a great show to round off 2024. That's my Saturday night takeaways for this week. As I say, it is a huge week for combat sports. Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson on Friday night. Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano, the rematch on Friday night. That's the co-main event. That should be the main event, really, but we know why it isn't. And then on Saturday, we have UFC 309, John Jones versus Stipe Miocic, Charles Oliveira versus Michael Chandler. It is going to be a huge weekend. We'll have coverage on the RDX Sports blog. Be sure to check that out. You can follow me on all the socials at Simon Head Sport. Don't forget you can subscribe to get this very podcast via the RDX Sports YouTube channel. You can also get it via Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And the only thing that remains is for me to say enjoy the rest of the week, enjoy the fights this weekend, and I'll speak to you soon. Take care.